Hi folks, this is a video I've contemplated on making for quite some time now, and it's to address the ancient argument of hunter versus anti-hunter. Now before you turn me off, I really encourage you to listen because I think there's some unique views that I'm going to be bringing to the table that's going to open our eyes or ground us in reality, hence why I've called this Grounded in Reality. So, what makes me qualified to talk on this? Well, not only am I proud to be a hunter and come from generations of hunting that I can trace in my genealogy all the way back until the early 1800s, but more importantly, I'm a registered professional wildlife and fisheries biologist, and I've worked in the environmental sector for my entire career prior to the TV show. I've worked at some incredibly high levels up to the United Nations Environmental Program Convention on Biological Diversity, working with countries from all over the world to better our planet. I've also worked at the federal level here in Canada under the Species at Risk Act with COSAWIC, integrating Western-based science with Aboriginal traditional knowledge for the betterment of species. And more importantly, I've also worked at the ground level here in Western Canada, Northwestern United States as a registered professional biologist doing over 72 studies on wildlife and fisheries in this great planet of ours. So, with Grounded in Reality, I would like to really focus on kind of 4 components. And yes, it's going to be a little bit long, but again, I really encourage you to not click that mouse and turn me off and listen to what I have to say. I'd like to talk originally about the actual argument itself, you know, and why is there hunters and anti-hunters, and what is the reality between the two of us? Because you know what? We're all human beings, and that's something we need to focus on more. Secondly, I'd like to also focus on what I like to call the hierarchy of life. And this is kind of from not just a spiritual component, but also looking at a scientific component of how do we fit into the food web. And you know, why is it that it's important for us to understand that? Thirdly, I'd also like to talk about footprint. Now this is a little science heavy, but it is something that I have worked on over 15 years of my life professionally, and it has really opened my eyes, and I think it's something that's really important for hunters and anti-hunters to fully understand. And then fourthly, I'd like to do the full circle. Why am I proud to be a hunter? Well, I'm sure after I explain a lot of it, I will really clarify why I'm proud to be a hunter and why I come from the hunting community. So, with no further delay, let's move on to the first topic. So, the ancient argument of hunter versus anti-hunter, or meat eater versus vegetarian vegan. Let's put some reality on this. Let's start with the historical facts. The historical facts are based on analyzing stomach content of some of our early humans, as well as just understanding the fact that we have always been hunter-gatherers. We are true omnivores. We're not just meat eaters, and we're not just vegetarians. We are both. Our body physiologically is designed, which leads perfectly into my next talk. Let's look at our human body. I mean, we're bipedal. We're designed with our eyes in the front of our head. We have binocular vision so that we can judge distance on our prey species. We also have remnants of canines, which is our eye teeth. We also have molars that have peaks on the back that are designed not just to crush nuts and eat vegetables, but also to break the fibrous content of meat apart. So to deny who we are is like a black bear denying that they're an omnivore. It's like a portion of a black bear population being prejudiced against another portion because one should just eat vegetables and one should just eat meats. That situation would not happen because they understand their role in the food web. They understand their physiological components in order to survive. This argument is really, you know, the basis of who we are, because I always say, if you don't understand who you are, then you can't put any arguments forward. And to deny this portion of ourselves is to deny ourselves as a human race. So that brings me to my second point in my discussion, which is something I like to call hierarchy of life. And I'm going to look at this from 2 different ways. One is more the emotional, spiritual component, but first of all, I'm going to talk about the scientific component of hierarchy of life, which is understanding everything that we study probably in grade 11 biology, which is the understanding of food webs. Us as human beings are a part of the food web. And what a food web is literally, it's not a spider web, but a spider web is a good way of understanding that at each cross point, something relies on something, and if one thing breaks down, the web falls apart. I mean, to remove ourselves out of it is a very typical human component, is we sit there, we look down at it, we think we're studying something we're not a part of, but we are a part of food webs. And if you understand how food webs work, It starts right at the base element of dirt and rocks, and it moves all the way up into trees and shrubs and forests, and then you move into small forest carnivores, large forest carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, and humans who are a part of that. So to remove ourselves out of the food web and to look that we're not a part of that food web is a fundamental flaw in looking at the ancient argument of hunter versus anti-hunter. We all rely. It's a consumptive process, which now moves me to the other side of what I was talking about, which is the whole spiritual and emotional argument, is that a lot of people seem to look at, the food web and they design a hierarchy. They look at it more like a food pyramid. And, as you move higher up, those forms become more and more important or more and more insignificant. But I prefer to look at the ancient belief system of the North American Indians or the Canadian First Nations or the Aboriginal people of all over the world, is they believed in a circular system. They believed that themselves are no more or no less important than a rock. And you know what, from a biological perspective, that makes total sense. It's when people start to look at eyes and fur, and they all of a sudden assign it a higher priority to do an emotionally charged argument that, one thing is cruel and it's not. But you see, the way I believe it, when you cut a head of lettuce from the ground, you're killing a living being. You're killing something that breathes, reproduces, tries to spread, like from a biological perspective and from also a perspective of our First Nations and Aboriginal people, life is life. And we're consumers, and we understand our role within the food web. We understand that we have to harvest life in order for us to live. Where the real argument comes into place that fuels a lot of the fire is individuals looking at it like, if I only consume a certain portion of the food web, it makes me better than the other portions that rely on the whole food web. But you're denying yourself. You're hiding in a shadow. You don't understand your actual biological role within a food web. There is no hierarchy of life. I know for me, a loss of life is a loss of life. But it's also what I am as a human species. It's my role within the food web. And as a biologist, I watch the impacts of agriculture. I watch the impacts of forestry. I watch the impacts of mining. I watch the impacts of hunting. I have to look at all of those components. And I can tell you one thing, all of those impacts have equal impact on the earth. Which will lead me into my next topic, which is about footprint. Well, folks, that's right. This is going to be a little bit more of the scientific portion of the discussion on a topic that I'd like to call footprint. And this is a term that started coming around anywhere between 10 to 15 years ago when scientists and researchers like myself started looking at something called cumulative effects. And it's understanding that as human beings, we have a footprint on everything we do. So, how does this relate to my argument of anti-hunting and hunting? Well, the reality is it's all the same. We all impact this planet with the things we do, no matter what it is. But if you understand your role within everything, you understand that we are consumers, you understand that we do need to survive by harvesting stuff off this planet, then you understand that it doesn't matter if you're a vegetarian or meat eater, it doesn't matter if you're an omnivore, we all have an impactful footprint on this planet. And it's why I kind of get so mad at this whole argument when I hear anti-hunters talking about how, we're shooting animals and how cruel it is. Well, it's a footprint. And guess what? Some of the largest footprint damages on this planet from cumulative effect studies have nothing to do with hunting. As a matter of fact, some of the largest impacts have to do more with the harvest of vegetation. Whether that's for natural resources or for food purposes, there's massive footprints caused by this. So I'm going to use an example. One of the largest products that are used in most and not just vegetarian or vegetable type dishes, but in any dishes, is palm oil. And I encourage you, go onto the internet. If you want to see what deforestation is happening in order to make palm tree plantations, it is absolutely devastating what's going on. Our entire North American prairies have been transformed from natural grasses into agricultural fields in order to feed the millions. But guess what? We're hunter-gatherers. We're gonna do that. Our population is incredibly high. We need to feed people, and all people. I'm not just talking about meat eaters, I'm talking about the human race. We all have a footprint. And I've talked to some people who say that, they've moved off the grid and, they're living, well, you know what? At one time we all lived off the grid, but guess what? We still had a footprint. If you grow a garden, you are changing native and indigenous soils and plants into something that you are growing to feed yourself. I don't see how people can hide behind this argument that just because they eat a certain thing or they don't do a certain activity, that you have no footprint. The houses we live in, the heat that we have, the cell phones that we use, the chairs we sit on, the carpet we walk on, all has a footprint. So unless you're willing to strip down absolutely naked and go run around in the bush surviving the way that bears and grizzly bears do, which will still provide a footprint because you still have to eat, you still have to consume, you still have to survive. And I encourage you, if you're going to run out naked into the bush, you better learn how to hunt because we are omnivores. So I just would like to say, if you look up cumulative effects, I really encourage you to look at it because as science, we're understanding that in order to study and understand the humans' impact on this planet, that we need to look at everything. We need to look at everything that we're doing. We need to look at, natural resource extraction. We need to look at, gardening and agriculture and hunting and fishing and everything we do. Urbanization, urban sprawl, linear corridors. All of those things combined have an impact or have a footprint. So just because somebody is setting a certain hierarchy of what they eat and consume doesn't give anybody the right to look at another portion who is living more true to the historical aspect of human beings as all of a sudden putting on a bigger footprint. We all have a footprint and we need to understand that. Well, thank you very much for listening to a lot of my ranting, but as I promised, I'm going to come full circle on this. So why am I proud to be a hunter? Well, I can tell you in all my years as a biologist, the most help and the most support I've been given on research to truly make an impact on bettering things and understanding things better, including human effects, came from hunters in the natural resource sector. It came from hunting groups like Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, SCI, Boone and Crockett, Pope and Young, the list goes on. Yes, they're membership driven, and yes, they're put together by groups of hunters. But the reason hunters raise the money and actually put it into the resource is because they understand the roles. They understand everything that I've just talked about. We're not in denial. We understand that by killing an animal, it's taking something off the planet. Just as we understand that by planting a garden or living in the house or running our trucks, we understand that all of those things have impacts. And what's more important is action, not words. Not doing everything I've talked about before by somehow putting yourself on a different level because of what you eat. What's more important is what are you doing to actively change things? That's what hunters do. We understand that. We don't deny our role in history. We don't deny our biological role. And more importantly, we don't have our head in the sand that by pointing out another group of people means that you're dissolved of your footprint. Nobody's dissolved of their footprint. Everybody has a responsibility to this planet, but everybody needs to understand we all consume, we all impact. Everything we do to survive impacts this planet. So what are you doing? Are you sitting there and basically trying to point out other groups to absolve yourself of that responsibility? Or are you just going to accept who you are and what's happening on this planet and work together as a human race? Not meat eaters, not vegetarians, not vegans, not hunters, not anti-hunters, because all of that is just a guise. What the most important thing is accepting the fact that yes, this planet is in trouble. So what are we going to do as a human race, people? We're going to do what hunters do. We acknowledge the fact that we know we're going to impact the environment, and we're going to raise money, we're going to raise interest, we're going to raise understandings to help better things. We're going to work with the government. We're going to work with the natural resource sector, oil and gas, forestry, all of those things, mining. We need to work together as a team to identify the problems and how we can better do it. We're never going to stop our footprint. That's not going to happen, but we can do it in a better way. So thank you very much for listening to Grounded in Truth. Hopefully there's something in here that will help you to understand our actual role. Take care.